Chris Addick from the Veterans Law Blog here. I wanted to pop on real quick and talk to you about a topic today. These pop-up videos that I'm doing, they're going to be random. I'm just going to pop on when I have a few minutes to talk to you guys and gals about various issues related to claims. We might talk about types of VA claims. We might talk about ways to prove it. We might talk about the process. We might talk about news or developments in the VA or the BVA or the Veterans Court or something. Yesterday we popped on and talked about that big, huge precedent set out by the Federal Circuit in Procopio, which expanded the presumption of Agent Orange exposure to blue water Navy vets who served in the territorial waters of the Republic of Vietnam. So we're going to do these videos. Today, I want to talk to you about sleep apnea, and there's a specific reason. I was talking to a veteran today, and the veteran was asking me to help him understand why the VA didn't service connect to sleep apnea, and it seemed fairly obvious to him. He had symptoms in service. He had a sleep study that showed his diagnosis, and he thought he had a really good nexus between the two. And so those are basically the elements, right? You need an in-service event, you need a current disability, and you need proof of the relationship or the nexus. And it's only got to be as likely as not, at least as likely as not. It's not a hard burden to prove. But the VA denied him, and he did not understand why. Well, my first question is, when somebody tells me that they've been denied service connection for sleep apnea, my very first question is, what type of sleep apnea do you have? And I'm surprised each time at how many veterans don't know what type. And it's important to know what type of sleep apnea you have, because I believe, having done hundreds, if not thousands of sleep apnea claims over the 12 or 13 years that I've been doing this law, I believe that sleep apnea, the nature of the diagnosis that you have for your sleep apnea, what type of sleep apnea you have, is what drives your sleep apnea claim. It's the very first thing that you need to know. It's the very first thing that you need to address, and let me tell you why. So, before we get into some of the mechanics of it, I want to reacquaint you with the three different types of sleep apnea diagnoses. Now, truth be told, there's a fourth that's I'm seeing more and more literature about. I'm seeing more and more doctors talk about it. I'm going to get it out of the way up front. It's called idiopathic sleep apnea, and it's basically fancy medical speak. I'm not a doctor, so this is a lawyer's translation of what doctors have to say, but basically it's saying it's sleep apnea that seems to present without a real clear etiology or origin. So we're going to set that aside because it's just too complicated for what we're trying to do here. The three most common types of sleep apnea that veterans are going to have are called obstructive sleep apnea, central sleep apnea, and complex or mixed sleep apnea. So let's talk about them each individually. Obstructive sleep apnea is a respiratory disorder. What that means is that you have an obstruction of your airway somewhere between where air goes in, your nose or your mouth, depending on if you're a nose breather or a mouth breather, and where oxygen starts to enter the bloodstream in your lungs. If there is an obstruction or blockage of the passage of air between point A and point B, that's going to be obstructive sleep apnea if you have sleep apnea that results from that obstruction. And so the second type is central sleep apnea. And central sleep apnea, even though the symptoms manifest as a sleep breathing disorder, it is not a respiratory disorder. It is a disorder of the central nervous system, because what's happening in central sleep apnea is your brain, which sends all the messages to all your different parts of your body through the nervous system. There is something that is not performing properly in the connection from your brain to your sleep breathing mechanism, or your breathing mechanism while you're sleeping. It could be a nerve problem. It could be some sort of issue with a joint out of alignment that's knocking the nerves and blocking the passage of nerves. It could be any number of different things. There could be brain chemistry issues. It's really complicated topic, central sleep apnea, and something that you're going to want to know about before you start trying to prove your VA claim. And I'm going to explain in more detail why here in just a second. The third type talked about is complex sleep apnea, and it's increasingly a more and more common type of sleep apnea that we're seeing. It's a mix of the two, and its official name is treatment emergent sleep apnea. And so what happens is is a veteran is diagnosed with obstructive sleep apnea, and the doctors start treating for obstructive sleep apnea, either with some sort of a breathing apparatus or assistive a device like a CPAP, a BiPAP, or a dental device that opens your mouth while you're sleeping. Any number of those things. While the treatment is going on, the symptoms of central sleep apnea start appearing. And so it starts presenting more and more as central sleep apnea. And so it's called treatment emergent or complex sleep apnea. And about 15% of the folks that have sleep apnea have complex sleep apnea. So those are three types. Why is that important in your VA claim? Because it drives a lot of the proof that you're going to make regarding in-service event and nexus. And it's also going to drive how the VA should respond to your claim. So what do I mean? You've got central sleep apnea, hypothetically. Central sleep apnea, recall, is a miscommunication between the brain and the muscles that trigger breathing while you're sleeping. Because of something misfiring along that path for whatever reason, you're not breathing, and you have a stoppage of breathing, a cessation of breathing, and you have that characteristic gasping for air that's with sleep apnea. And so while you're proving that up, you are not probably going to argue that it was a nasal surgery or scarring from some sort of nasal surgery, or some other physical condition that caused it, because that simply doesn't necessarily equate. I'm not saying it's impossible. Nothing in medicine, nothing in science is impossible, but you're going to raise eyebrows if you're arguing that your central sleep apnea was caused by some event that's commonly associated with obstructive sleep apnea. And by the same token, if you have central sleep apnea, you're probably most likely going to have a doctor in there on the nexus opinion to help prove that up, because that gets into those complex issues of brain chemistry. And frankly, you'll need a nexus opinion for a obstructive sleep apnea as well. I go into that in my book, Put It to Rest, How to Prove VA Sleep Apnea Claims, about the different types of experts, when you're going to want an expert, how to do the expert proofs in these claims. So I go into that in more detail. But that said, keep that in mind, that it's going to drive your responses. It also can kind of play into your court too, if the VA denies your claim. So let's say you are arguing that your central sleep apnea should be service connected, and let's say that they come back and say what they always say with sleep apnea. The VA's got like 3 or 4 canned responses: either your neck's too big, obesity, or smoking. I mean, those are the 3 things that they always come back and they find some way to blame it on. Frankly, any time that the VA finds out that a veteran smoked, they try to pin all of the disabilities on it. So if you lost an arm when a grenade went off, they're going to say, well, it was because you were smoking, right? And I don't mean to make light of that. I really don't. Those are serious injuries. I'm really trying, probably shouldn't be as sarcastic as I am, but I see that so much, it's disheartening when the VA does it. So frankly, I tell folks that unless you really have to, I don't think the VA really needs to know if you ever smoked. It's just not something that's important. Your doctors might need to know, and the expert that's doing it might ask you, and you don't want to hide it. I'm not saying hide it, but I don't think you need to be telling the VA your smoking history. But in any event, unless you're asked. If you're asked, talk. But if they come back and they say your central sleep apnea is not service connected because you're obese and your neck is too big, well, think about that. Does that really make a difference for a nervous condition, how big your neck is or what your body mass index is? No, it really doesn't. And so you're going to use that to advance your appeal a little bit further. So what I recommend to all veterans, when you get a diagnosis of sleep apnea, talk to your doctor. Understand whether you've got central, obstructive, or complex sleep apnea, or frankly, if you have idiopathic, if you're one of those rare situations, you're going to want to know that. First of all, it's good, smart sense to talk to your doctor about that sort of thing, because it helps you get through the treatment a little bit better, and it might motivate you to choose a different type of treatment, depending on what you understand about your condition. That said, it also helps you understand how to prove your claims. And so I would encourage you all to ask your doctor to talk to you about it. You don't need to tell them. You don't need to get them to document it. You're going to have a conversation with your doctor so that you understand your medical condition. You understand where the doctors think it came from. Because remember, in VA claims, lay evidence about medical diagnosis is admissible and competent evidence. So if a doctor tells you, you can absolutely communicate that to the VA or the BVA through your own testimony. Got it?